Welcome to the Gridiron Expert. We are going to be looking over the Wake Forest Demon Deacons next up. And joining us on the channel is Cam Lemons Debro. Cam, how are you doing?
Doing well. How are you doing, Connor? Happy Monday.
Doing fantastic. I appreciate you joining me on the channel on a holiday and taking time out of your very busy schedule that we were discussing before we started recording here. So yeah, I appreciate you doing this.
Happy to be here. I'm always, football never really stops. It's one of those things of even when you think the season's over and camp's over, then there's recruiting, and then by the time you finish the recruiting, oh, it's fall camp time. So always happy to be here.
Well, that's great. And Wake Forest, so they're kind of an intriguing team this year. They've got a very manageable schedule, which we will get into later. They've got a lot of new players and a new coaching staff, so very intriguing team when you look at the ACC this year. They don't play a lot of the top teams. Again, we'll get to that schedule in a second. But looking over the offense first here, it's a rather interesting quarterback room. They bring in a couple of transfers, a guy from Charlotte. Ashford from South Carolina, Auburn, Oregon. He's been at every Power Four conference except for now the Big 12 joining the
Right.
Demon Deacons of the ACC. So take me through this quarterback room. What's it looking like?
Right. So quarterback was an interesting thing when back in December when we thought Dave Clawson was going to be the head coach. It was Jeremy Hecklinski who was a borderline four-star quarterback, and then they brought in a transfer, Ethan Hampton, who was at Northern Illinois, and they thought, okay, cool, this is going to be the two guys that are going to be it. Clawson steps down on December 16th, and that's the first place my eyes went to because different coach is going to mean different quarterbacks. And so what they did is Ethan Hampton got released from his letter of intent, and then what they ended up doing was they brought in Robbie Ashford and Sean Purdy. So for the entire spring camp, those two plus Jeremy Hecklinski were fighting for the starting job. And then once we got through spring camp, kind of saw a little more of what the new coaching staff wanted to do, what they wanted, and Jeremy Hecklinski kind of fell to the third spot. There's no between Ashford and Purdy, no one's really separated themselves for the top spot, but we kind of saw Jeremy move down, and I think it was fair. It wasn't anything sort of talent wise. They want their quarterbacks to be mobile this year. They really are trying to say, hey, we want to beat you at least with some athleticism there. And so you have two interesting guys with Deshaun Purdy and Robbie Ashford. Ashford's been around the block a few times, Oregon, South Carolina, Auburn. He's been around. And, I think with him, you know who he is at this point in time. If you've been in college for this many years, there's not really you can improve obviously, but you're not probably not going to go from what you were of being a fringe starter here and there to being say a Heisman candidate. That's just hard to do. And so, but with him, I think his strengths are. I think he has a solid deep ball when he gets to uncork it. I think it's where he feels more comfortable. And the big thing with him is his athleticism. Every time he got to pull the ripcord, it was just going to be a big play, and you just saw it happening. And so I think that's great. But I think the consistency at times can be a little bit off. And then Purdy's really, really young. He came over from UNC Charlotte with our guy Biff. Love that guy. And you could tell he was kind of just let to do whatever he wanted to do. There are just some bad, and I don't mean that from like an off the field or like there were some sort of like problems in terms of that. It's more of just his schematics, the way his fundamentals are when it comes to things. You're like, someone should have broken that habit last year, and a lot of times it's his feet. His feet can be a mess from sometimes, and you think about it, and you're like, he's throwing the ball, and he can throw the ball. He is a off the bus type of guy. You're like, wow, that dude's legitimately 6'4", 230. And
Charlotte
he
had a bunch of those kind of players that last year. They brought in a bunch of like power conference transfers, and
yeah.
it's like they don't look like their record says that they are.
No. I walked up to him and was like, wow, you are a big boy. So, but he would throw the ball sometimes, and it's like, why are you throwing the ball like you're 6 foot 5'11" when I know you're 6'4"? And sometimes you look great, realize it's your feet. And so I think with him, that consistency needs to be fixed because when he is on, it's because, and I would have problems if the problems were decision making. There hasn't been a lot of times where he's made a bad decision. It's just been mechanically it doesn't work out. And I think that's something they're trying to break. And so if they can break that, I would probably peg him as the starter, but I don't know if we're going to be there just yet. But he can also move. And I think that's something they really like. If you're a 6'4" and you can move like he kind of does, there's a little bit of a higher floor for him.
And so, what's the expectation, I guess, for the quarterbacks this year? I know you're talking about they want them to be incorporated in the running game. At least both Ashford and the Charlotte transfer, they both have experience here. And like so, Deshaun Purdy, his name escaped me there for a second,
Yeah.
and Robbie Ashford, they're both pretty good athletes. Ashford, as you mentioned, he's been a little bit up and down with the passing game, but I guess what would Wake Forest fans be satisfied with in terms of quarterback performance this year?
Don't make a nuclear play. There is, and we'll talk about the running backs, between the fan base and the coaching staff. The idea of what they want to do is they want whoever wins the quarterback, look, do not throw us out of a game, because what you're going to do here is you're going to take the ball when you gets hiked to you. You're going to turn around and you're going to hand it to Demond Claiborne. You're going to do that about 25 times a game.
Yeah.
And so as long as you can keep us in these situations, sometimes Demond's gonna hit stuff. You'll be in some second and longs, third and longs. That's where I need you to not be nuclear. I need you to be able to fight. You can fight, but I need you to be able to live to the next down. Because one thing we can't do, and that's something that played Wake Forest last year, and it definitely played Wake Forest the year before, was they'd be in these very tight games, and then just a nuclear mistake, whether it's a pick, it's a fumble, it's a sack, and you're now, instead of you having 3rd and 2, it's fourth and 7 or 4th and 8. Instead of it being, you're on the whatever 40-yard line, it's a pick and now it's going back the other way, or it's a fumble and now you don't have the ball anymore. It's I we don't need you to sit here and be the hero. If you become the hero, that's great, that's phenomenal. But there's so much talent with this running back room, with this wide receiver room, that what we want you to do is just, you don't need to, game manager is kind of a pejorative term, but can you just get us, down to down? Can you just keep us afloat?
Right. And so you mentioned there with the talented running back room, Damon Claiborne. So Claiborne returns. For those that are unaware, maybe not a ton of eyes were on Wake Forest last fall. Wake Forest had 1,000-yard rusher last year.
Yep.
Not a ton of teams can say that they return a guy that ran for over 1,000 yards going into 2025. There's a few guys that are overlooked from a national stage, and Claiborne's one of them. And so talking about this running game, Cam, what is the ceiling? Now, it's obviously Claiborne's the guy here, but what are they expecting in terms of second, third string here? And then what do you think the ratio of run to pass will be this fall?
I think they're really excited about this, about the running back room, obviously with Claiborne, but they really like the spring that a guy like Drew Pickett, who was originally kind of buried on the depth chart. Drew Pickett had a really, really good spring camp, and they're really happy with him. Ty Clark was someone that both staff, the prior and the new staff, have really liked. Tate Carney has been a staple of just I don't want to call him a fullback, but he's definitely going to hit you in the mouth. They got Jamiro Clements, who was a solid, D2, I believe, running back. They think they have both a high end talent with Damon Claiborne and then also some depth to complement him. And I think they want to be able to use it. I think they really want to lean on that running game. I don't think this ends up being like a 80-20 sort of split, but I do think if you end up being closer to 60-40 of run to pass, I think that's probably where they want to be. Because I also think if you're Wake Forest, you have to understand there are certain ways you are going to have to be able to win. You're never going to out athlete everyone. And depth is a myth. But I think with when you're retooling an entire team, depth can be a little bit interesting. You know how you can mitigate that? By shortening the game. And one way you shorten the game is, look, if Damon Claiborne hits a home run, cool. I'm never gonna say no to that. But if I can just take the time and take the time and take the time, all of a sudden I'm now in a lot of games. I think that's something people don't really realize when they're talking about, 'cause Wake will be an underdog. I mean, their win total is 4.5. They're going to be an underdog in a fair amount of their games. I think people always think about when you're saying, hey, you can get this upset, you got to match them blow for blow. A lot of times that's not how those upsets happen. A lot of times those upsets happen simply because you just made that game, instead of it being 60 minutes, you made that game about 30.
Yep.
And you've really just said, okay, wow, you just blinked and that was even if it's if it ends in a field goal, you prefer touchdowns, but wow, that 15 play, 75-yard
Yep.
drive that ended in in a field goal or touchdown, cool, man. Like you just took 8 minutes off the clock. And I think I think they want to be a little up tempo. I think there's not going to be Army Navy sort of glacier pace. But I do think they want to start leaning on people in the run game a bit more and bit more and bit more.
So you do think Wake Forest is going to take the approach of trying to play like in a phone booth this fall?
Yeah, and I think I think athletically they have some guys that make some explosive plays, both at running back and wide receiver. But I don't think if you're going to sit here and run the football as much as I know they want to run the football, there's only a certain amount of styles that let you do that. And so again, I think they'll still do some hurry up stuff, and they'll move the clock. But I don't know if this will be the 2021 Wake Forest team that was sitting here like, "Yep, and 3 seconds have passed, and there's been three more plays happening." I don't
Yeah.
think that's going to happen. I think it will be a little more slower and a little more, I don't want to say methodical, but I think they definitely want to lean on you.
It's going to be similar to what PJ Fleck in Minnesota do in the Big Ten. They play
I
in
see
a
that.
phone booth very well. They've done that for several years. Of course,
Yeah,
they had some explosive playmakers out wide in
yeah,
2019. They've had a couple receivers that had season-ending injuries, but don't want to go too much on a tangent here. But Wake Forest is probably going to be doing that in the
right.
ACC for this coming fall. And if they were to be very efficient in the running game and dominating the time possession battle, the offensive line is going to have to do their job. And so, how do you think the offensive line's looking going into the season?
Yeah, I mean, that's probably outside of quarterback, that is probably the most important place. I mean, in general, I think offensive line, they never get the shine that they deserve, but the guys up front are what's going to control this. I mean, they went out and they won a very, very, very big recruiting battle for Lily Mo. We love Lily. They beat out LSU and Nebraska and a bunch of like very good and very well off NIL programs to get him in. One thing he had in his history has been injury issues. He was someone that was looked at as an NFL draft prospect, probably middle round, probably like fourth, fifth round. So, but the injuries have kind of gotten to him a little bit. And so I think being able to keep him healthy would be imperative for them. Keeping a guy like Melvin Siani is healthy. They went out and got, Jamarion Kennedy from Louisiana Tech. And so they've really rebuilt this offensive line. I think it's a solid line. The big part of it, I think they can mix and match. And I think that's the biggest thing. I think we understand, and when healthy, Philly Famo is going to play left tackle. Devin Kalani is going to be their starting center. And I believe George Sell is probably going to be at right guard. But I think you can kind of mix and match, what's going to happen at left guard, what's going to happen at right tackle. And I think being able to have different options is something that I think they really want to be able to say, look, we can go 8 or 9 deep. And, we might not be the most elite 8 or 9 deep, but it's at least, look, if we can suffer, one injury, you never want an injury, but you have to prepare for it. If we can suffer one injury and be fine and not have to shift too much around, we'll feel a lot better.
So, yeah, they don't think there is going to be like really any or much of a drop off from their first to their second string offensive
No,
line guys.
no.
And that's a quality thing to have. Not most teams can say that.
Right.
So looking at the receiving core, like for Wake Forest, this has been an exciting unit over the last like 6, 7 years. It's like they always have like that one guy that no one talks about that can break through and have 800 plus receiving yards. Do you think that there will be an alpha in this room this year?
That's really interesting because I haven't really asked myself that question because I kind of see them all. I think there can be. I think there are people that can be. I think a guy like Micah Mays going into I believe his third year is someone that they are really high on, and he has all the tools to be able to be a high level ACC receiver in terms of being on the outside. I think he has everything it takes right now. And I think where his development is can be there. They really loved Carlos Hernandez. There was a reason they brought him over. They really like it. I think he has a really solid blend of size and speed. He can play inside, he can play outside, and they prefer to put him outside. Um, I like Sterling Burkhalter. I think the drops kind of need to be, fixed a little bit. If I had to pick someone that's like under the radar that I was able to watch, and I'm like, you know what, you could actually become a quote unquote alpha, Sawyer Racanelli. You never really think about a guy that comes from Montana, and you're like, you're just kind of deaf, and because it's like, oh, cool, it's Montana. You're 6'3", 200 pounds, whatever. You watch him, and he just catches everything. He just catches every single ball out there. And you kind of have to, you sit there and you go, oh, you've done this. And at first, I watched just about every spring camp practice. And I was like, after 3, 4 days, I was like, you know what? Fine. He catch me. Then it just kept happening. Then day 8 came and day 10 came, day 12 came. And they're like, you're still doing this. And so I think there has the ability for a guy like a Micah Mays to be the alpha. I don't know if it ends up happening though, and I think it could be a good thing or bad thing. I think there could be the bad part would be someone not separating themselves, but I think the good thing might be I feel like this is a roster that they're gonna spread the ball around a bit more. I think when you talk about playing the phone booth, I think that's something they want to do. They want to be able to get guys to make plays. Sometimes you're gonna make that jump ball play to Micah Mays, but look, Carlos, if you get him on the screen, he can take it. If you get Sawyer kind of in the middle, he can do whatever he needs to do. They got a guy in Karate Benson who I think, has some really legitimate speed to him. And I think that's how they want to pepper things a little bit and make sure they want to keep people on their toes a bit.
How's the tight end room? How's the tight end room looking? I think their top guy from last year, Lodge, is no longer there.
So funny. So Harry Lodge transferred out in December, went to Georgia Tech, and then transferred back to Wake
Oh,
Forest.
so he is back.
He's
That's
back came back in the spring portal window. I'm gonna have to balk at the tight end position because we just didn't really know. So with the tight ends, Lodge left. A couple guys ended up just, not being there between injuries and whatnot. And so they honestly just really didn't have that many. They were practicing with walk-ons for a vast majority of the spring camp. But now you get Harry Lodge back. You get Cameron Johnson from Vanderbilt, who Vanderbilt was really high on, but Vanderbilt also has two just insane
yeah,
tight ends.
yeah.
So a little bit buried there. Dom DeLuca, it seems like they've taken a step. Will Lozelle, brought him in as a transfer as well. They got Charlie Winkler bringing in. So I think I want to be able to see fall camp, because I think it's one of those things of they've added people that have played a ton of snaps now, but now I want to be able to see how they're integrating them into the offense more because I don't think they really had the opportunity to come in the spring camp. And I think come fall, we'll be able to see that a little more.
So Claiborne's definitely like early on going into the season, he is the best player on this offense. But if someone else becomes alpha number two, or like he's the reason why, our offense hit its ceiling, what player do you think has the most room for growth and potential?
I think I'll stick with Micah Mays there because I think just with his body type, like Micah is the guy that, if people don't remember his recruitment, it was a couple of years ago. Miami was all over him. Miami, he's a guy from Palm Beach, and so they really wanted. But he's 6'2", 6'3", little under 200 pounds. Was an insane high jump and triple jump and 400-meter dash. So he's got long speed. He's got explosiveness. He can get up and get the ball. And I think that's something that Wake has really desperately missed in the last couple of years is like I think Horatio Field did a solid job at it, but kind of regressed a little bit from time to time. I think the year before that, Jamal Banks did the same thing as well. The quarterback play wasn't really good either. But I think and especially when you're a team that wants to run the football as much as they do, the best way to get them to back out of the box, being able to have someone that can just go up and get the ball for 15, 20 yards.
Yeah.
And so I think having a guy like that, Micah made some really solid strides last year. I think as the season went on last year, Micah got better and better and better. And you're like, okay, this is the guy we're starting to see, I think come year three, he'll be a really good player. And I think that's kind of the expectation. I think if he breaks out, I think Wake is probably in a phenomenal spot on offense to do what they want to do.
Moving on to the defense. So going into last year, I think most thought that the Wake like front six, front seven was probably going to be the strength of the defense. They had a pretty young secondary last year. We'll get to the secondary here in a second. So they do return some of their top linebackers,
Yep.
a few defensive linemen. What is the overall expectation for the Wake Forest run defense and the front six, front seven overall?
They want to shut down the run. They want that to be priority number one. You are not going to run the ball on us. So with the defensive line, they actually had to essentially rebuild. Their top five guys all exhausted their eligibility last year. And so they really, regardless if it was Clausen or Dicker, they were like, we have to go and rebuild an entire starting defensive line. And I loved the pieces when they got them. I think after watching them, a guy like Langston Hardy on the edge has been really good. A guy like Gabe Kershke from Colorado State has been very, very good. He's got Langston has his brother Cam. He's been pretty good. But I think bringing back these linebackers, Quincy Bryant and Dylan Hazen were two very good ACC linebackers last year. Quincy Bryant played his tail off a lot. And so I think what they want to be able to do is be more of an aggressive defense. You hear that buzzword a lot: be aggressive, be aggressive, be aggressive. But I think in action, you started to see it a little bit more as things went on. And I thought their run defense last year was fine, but I think this year they're a little better equipped up front to be able to handle some of the better run games in the ACC.
Do you think this could be a top half in the ACC run defense this year?
I think it could. I think these linebackers are some really good. Like my questions for Dylan Hazen are more in pass game than they are in run game. I think he's really good in the run game. Quincy, same sort of thing. I think he's a really, really good run stopper. So I think when you have two backers, and I think Aiden Hall can play well as well. When you have linebackers that you can trust to fit the gaps right, and even if they don't, they can still have a little bit of speed of getting out to the edge. I like that a lot more. And I think with the guys, especially at defensive tackle, they have of, Dallas Afalava and Mateen Iberoga and Jaden Loving. I think these are guys that I feel really good about just saying, look, I just need you to just stay here, hold your gap, and we're going to go from there.
Yeah. Do you think this defensive line could wreak havoc this year?
I think they could. I'm a little more in terms of the pass game. I think I'm a little more bullish on the edges than I am the tackles, just because I think the style of defensive tackle they have is a little bit more beneficial for the run game than it is the pass game. But I think the edges, like I think a guy like Langston Hardy and Gabe Kershke and Newer as well could be really, really effective. The question then becomes, like last year, I thought their front seven was actually a really good front seven, but it came with the caveat of that doesn't matter because of what happens with your quarterback.
Right. So moving on to that secondary, they lost a lot of production from the 2023 unit going into last year. So they were really young last year. There is some production coming back. Do you think that this group could take a pretty big step forward this year?
Are they healthy is the question, because I thought that last year, and injuries just hurt them so much. You basically Capone Blue was injured in and out of the lineup all year before suffering a essentially career-ending injury in the Yukon game. Sedarius Kelly was just in and out of the lineup all year. Jamari Glasker was in and out. They were playing guys. They were playing essentially walk-ons at certain points, and there it was at a point where they were had to play just stock cover three because it was like, look, we just don't have the bodies at this point to do that. And I think now, I think they have retooled the defensive back, the corner room, I should say. And, they bring in Karan Prunty from North Carolina A&T, Lardarius Webb from South Alabama, Shad Williams. I think those three guys, Sasha Garcia as well. I think those four guys are starting level corners. I think they have some people that can be starting level corners. I really like what Trayvon West was doing last year, and I think he's taken a step in fall camp. Zamari Stevenson can now actually play his normal position. He doesn't have to play outside like they forced him to last year. I think Jackson Mole can be a fine corner. I think everyone would prefer him to play, 15 snaps, not 50. And so I think doing that's a little bit better. And so I like what they did at corner. The safety room is really, really good. I don't have any complaints there. I didn't last year, but I think everything revolves around, I think they have pieces in the corner room. Can they stay healthy?
So at the beginning of this episode, we hinted at the schedule not being too daunting this year for Wake Forest, and so yeah, there's no Clemson, no
Nope.
Miami,
Nope.
no Louisville, and the Demon Deacons host Georgia Tech, SMU, and North Carolina in ACC play, and the non-conference schedule is pretty manageable as well. So Cam, what are your thoughts in regards to the overall expectation for this fall? And then what do you think is the ultimate ceiling for this team?
I think expectations should be if you make a bowl game, it's a success for you. And I say that, everyone, you never know until the lights come on. But when you look at the schedule and, you open up with Kennesaw State and then Western Carolina, your other two non-conference games are Oregon State and Delaware. At the bare minimum, you should go 3-1 in those contests. And so from there, you get NC State, who I don't know if anyone's really all that sure what they're going to look like. And, last year, Wake was a worse team than them, went into Raleigh and beat them. So I don't really know. Like, you could still, doesn't matter if they're a better team, you can still win there. Georgia Tech, I think Georgia Tech will be a solid team, but you get them at home. Virginia Tech, I don't really know if anyone knows how good Virginia Tech is going to be. Florida State, I'm not sure.
Yeah.
SMU, I think SMU is probably a top two, three team in the ACC. I'm not pinning it in as a loss, but that's probably one you don't expect to put in the win column. But you get them at home. North Carolina, you get at home. Virginia, are they going to be good? I'm not sure. Duke, are they going to be good? I'm not sure. So I think, there are enough and I say coin flip, not a true 50-50, but in that 40 to 60 range where realistically you should go, okay, if we play well enough, we don't beat ourselves, we can be someone that makes a bowl game. I think if you make the bowl game, I think that's like a pure, like, hey, we did success after having to retool our entire roster. Now the ceiling, I think this it's kind of weird, similar to the 2021 team. I don't think they'll end up making the ACC title game as like that. But when you play that many coin flips, sometimes the coin flips go in your way. Could you end up being an 8-win, 9-win team? I think so, but that also goes in the other end of, you also could be a 3-4 win team because coin flips are coin flips. So, but I think if you had a ceiling, I could see 8 or 9 wins saying like, and you go, yeah, no, that checks out.
And if Wake Forest does end up hitting this ceiling of 8 to 9 wins, what position group do you think will have to stay healthy for Wake Forest to kind of max out, so to speak?
Got to be corner. We've had a couple of years at Wake where the corners just either weren't playing well or just weren't healthy or weren't playing well because they weren't healthy. And I just think it's just so important in this day and age where college football hasn't really matched what the NFL has done in terms of the NFL is starting to move more to a run heavy offense. It's a circle of life, but I think the ACC is still a really pass happy offense league. And so I think being able to just don't die in the passing game and being able to say we have to play 8 yards off, we have to do this. If you can stay healthy there, then I think everything else in your defense feels better. And then I think if you're not worried about your defense, your offense has a little bit less pressure on you. You're able to shorten these games. And, when you're trying to shorten these games, part of it is you can't give up an explosive play for 60 yards with 30 seconds left. And I think that's something where if you can handle it at corner, you'll be fine.
We'll see if that style of play, kind of playing in a phone booth, we'll see how good Wake Forest does there and how many maybe close games they can play in and they can ultimately pull out here. It'll be an interesting season, especially for those ACC teams that don't have to play those top teams and they can be in, some more toss-ups. Yeah, it'll make it a really interesting season for the Demon Deacons. Well, Cam, really good job previewing Wake Forest. For our viewers, please tell our subscribers where they can find your content.
Yeah, you can find me on Twitter, Blue Sky at Cam Lemons underscore. You can also find all my writing at Demon Deacon Digest, part of the 24/7 network.
Yeah.